Hello, welcome to Philosophy, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega and Nick Vale. And today we're going to be talking a little about the placebo effect, how what you believe about the effectiveness of a drug, for example, changes how effective it is and how much it heals your body to a certain extent. And now I don't know all that much about it, but I suppose that, George, you've researched this?
I have researched it some, and it's not, in science and medicine, it's really not controversial. It's something that is completely accepted. And for example, with some kinds of medications, it makes it very difficult for them to test how effective the medication is because they sometimes just can't figure out whether it's the real medication or whether it's the placebo effect.
Do you know the difference between a blind and a double-blind placebo effect? Either of you?
No. What's the difference?
I think double-blind is when the doctor himself doesn't know he's in on this study, that he's actually thinking also that he's giving you the correct pill. That's a double-blind. A single-blind is when you, the patient alone, don't know it's a fake pill, but the doctor knows.
That's a good point.
Yeah, you've heard of that, right?
Yep. All right, now here's another.
So drug companies do blind and double blind.
Okay. Guys, here's another dimension of this. We all understand, for example, let's say we drink caffeine or something, and something that's matter, that's material, is affecting our consciousness. It's kind of like matter over mind, right? So
yeah.
Now, all right, but the placebo effect is mind over matter, right? So in other words,
But what science can you argue to back up that? I mean, you guys are both scientists, and I don't really do many of your podcasts anymore, but from a scientific perspective, you really shouldn't believe in the placebo effect because it's not scientific. Well, it's not actually chemicals affecting you. It's just in your head.
But that's the point. In other words,
if you're not actually taking the right pill, then how does it work?
It's similar to the hard problem in human consciousness. The hard problem of human consciousness is how do you get these neurons that are physical and end up with this consciousness that we can't figure out the physicality of it?
And also, does the placebo effect work in reverse? Say smoking causes lung cancer, but say I gave you fake cigarettes your whole life. Could that also cause lung cancer because someone told you it does? Does it work in the negative?
I sure hope not.
Yeah, no, because I've heard of something called the nocebo effect.
Yeah, that too, right?
That may be it. I'm not sure, yeah. Because actually sometimes, you hear these doctors in training, they start reading up about all this stuff and they think they have it. That's common in medical school.
Right.
But again, this question.
No, I think it's something. If you're at a restaurant and you say I give you something that's perfectly benign, but then George says, "Oh no, you really ate that horrible vegetable that gives you a headache." You might get a headache. Just believe, it might. Then I think the negative does work because you'll say, "Oh, that's why I have a headache," and you'll have a worse headache, even though what you ate is perfectly fine. I think it does work in reverse.
Yeah.
It can cause you terrible harm as well.
I've heard of people being given alcohol, they're told they're given alcohol, right? They get drunk and they're given fruit juice. I've heard of that. So, but guys, what this tells you, I mean, sometimes you're all right, in physics, mass and energy. That's why they call it mass energy. Mass and energy are different aspects of the same stuff, right?
Right.
So it could be that mind and matter are different aspects of the same stuff. Chandler, how does that sound?
Well, that sounds fine to me, because as far as I was always concerned, mind is matter. Everything's material, everything's physical, including consciousness, including the mind. It's just that we're not able to understand it. I don't think there's any way for you to go outside of your brain, your mind, whatever, and examine it, because as soon as you're outside of that, you're dead. As soon as you're no longer having the mind, so you can't inspect it.
So yeah, it kind of reminds us of like the before the Big Bang. We know we kind of assume something happened, but we can't access it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, there's things like that I don't think we really know. We just hear scientists say it, and because we don't know any different, we just kind of accept it on faith to a certain extent. You know, in fact, there was this guy that Paffa and I were talking to who says that like he doubts the Big Bang. He doesn't actually believe that. He thinks it was something for political and social reasons.
Huh. That's interesting. So what's his theory of how that happened? Of how the universe.
Well, I don't actually know. We'd have to talk to him about that specifically, but I guess he's done some research into the social reasons for why that was promoted, and those scientists who went against it were like ostracized, sort of. But of course he believes in like an eternal universe, and he calls it the forever all. You know, so he's kind of more like we are in that there's an infinite regress, there's an eternal existence, and there's no escaping that on one level or another.
Right, because we believe that too. And others, like before the Big Bang, we don't believe that there was nothing. There must have been something.
Right. I mean, we actually don't see nothing anywhere. There's nowhere that there's nothing. I mean, there's always some particle, some microscopic something. Even air, you know, is still matter.
All right. So if mind can affect matter, and you know we accept that the placebo effect happens, that it's valid, then the question becomes, what are the limits? In other words, like. For example, like a lizard loses its tail, right? And then like, you know, maybe the lizard in its mind is like, oh, I lost my tail. I need a new tail. And all of a sudden a new tail grows. You know, do you think maybe like, so what's the limit of what we could as human beings potentially do with our mind that is going to control our matter, our bodies?
Well, that's a good question, George. It's like, if you believe something strongly enough, would it become a reality? And I think what's interesting about this, George, is that because I have this thing about not wanting to believe things unless I establish that they're true, but what we're talking about now is things becoming true because we believe them rather than the other way around.
Yeah, like our belief is kind of like it's like the four fundamental forces of nature. It's like gravity. It's an actual force that makes things happen. I mean, it's amazing stuff.
So you're saying just by believing something, you can change your biochemistry and actually start, like you said, growing like a lizard would if it wants. I mean, I don't believe that, no. It would have to be something from the outside causing the chemicals or the DNA to change, not just believing something can change. I mean, you can't just grow something because you're thinking about it. That sounds a little nutty to me.
Well, yeah, or I would have just grown wings and flown away a long time ago.
Well, I mean, actually, or like, for example, let's say you had like some animals, like.
But I mean, if you believe something, it becomes true to you. For example, if you believe that a pill makes you sick, then the next time you take it, it might actually do that. So, you know, that does seem to, you know, people love to justify why things happen to them. And even if it's erroneous, that's what they'll believe, and then it becomes true to them. And then they'll just keep, you know, kind of rehashing that over and justifying why they, you know, don't feel well, because they kind of expect and anticipate that to happen. So it does, because it happened before. But meanwhile, the pill may have made them sick because they didn't sleep well the night before, but they block that part out and just think it's that pill. And then they kind of correlate them for the rest of their lives, and it always does. Meanwhile, it was for a different reason, which is probably not sleeping well or whatever. So that they connect the dots erroneously.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you anticipate something and then it happens, then you anticipate it again and it happens, eventually you've connected those neurotransmitters in your brain that it will happen. It's kind of like Pavlov's dog with the cookie and the was it the dog or the steak? Was it a steak or a cookie?
Probably
or
both.
Whatever. A little kid can hear a bell, and every time the bell rings, the mother gives him a cookie. Then the bell rings, and he'll expect the cookie and start salivating, or or the dog with the steak. So that does work that way.
Yeah, because we make these connections even if they're the wrong connections.
Well, once it happens enough, your body does change to expect it, and then it expects the neurology will link.
All right, but
Yes.
guys, consider this. Consider this also. It may be like, in other words, like
It's all conditioning.
it may be mind over matter, but it may not happen within like the lifetime of a person or an organism. And what I'm saying is, like, imagine like millions and millions of years ago, right? Some animal on the land sees, let's say, a leaf fall from the tree, right? And it's thinking to itself, wow, this leaf is just floating up in the air. I wish I could do that, right? And so it can't do that, right? But that memory of wishing that gets stored in its DNA, and all of a sudden the DNA starts working on it, and then 50 million years later, the offspring of that organism has wings.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, see, because my thought is that there could be, on a certain level, where the cells, like, that contain the DNA, like that their beliefs, like they have their own little consciousness and beliefs, and then they even plan things. That's what I think. Of course, I know some of our other co-hosts would yell at us about that because they tend to not like that idea, but. That's kind of what I think. There could be something to it, like on a cellular level, be some intention for regrowing a tail or growing wings, maybe.
So are you saying there was an animal that before it was a giraffe had a very short neck, and it just started wishing it had a longer neck because the leaves were higher up, and then 5 generations later, that was the reason that their neck was longer just because they wanted it, or because something they were eating or the sunlight or the water or the temperature made an aberration in their children with a slightly larger neck, and then it was weeded out by natural selection, and then those kids survived because they had a slightly longer neck so they could eat the food towards the top, and then it just kept snowballing. I mean, I think it's because of the latter, not the former, that they got longer necks because of something from the environment, not because they were just wishing that. Like, George's theory is a little... No offense, but it's a little crazy.
Okay. Well, here's the point: whether it was an intention and a wish of the DNA or something, or an external thing that caused DNA to change and then weeded out by natural selection, both of them were caused by the external environment. Either way, either the wish to have a longer neck, or whatever other change that caused the mutation of the DNA.
Because wishing for a longer neck, though internal, is caused by the giraffe, the animal before the giraffe seeing the high leaf, and then it's still external even though it became internal. That's very good, because even though a desire is internal, it's still itself caused by the environment. I'm talking. You said to shout.
No.
Exactly.
Eyeballing the high tree is external.
But guys, Chandler, I think you're right. I think it may not just be our human consciousness or the consciousness of these animals and organisms. I think it may also be the consciousness of the DNA itself. And there's a third source for this. They know this. For example, sometimes we have this bacteria, this flora in our intestines, and it makes us act differently. It can make us depressed. It can make us happier. It can make us anxious. It can make us calm. So you have these bacteria that aren't even a part of us, basically changing our physiology.
Yeah, but I want to focus on what Chandler just said. It's very important, because most people think a desire is internal, but really everything is external because your environment creates that desire. So the animal before a giraffe would have to see the high tree and then desire it, which is actually still external. That's very good. I like that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because basically we can't really create distinctions and say something's internal or external, because everything's caused by something else before,
I know, but people listening to us might think any desire they have is an internal thing. They don't realize it's still the environment. No matter you get that thought to do something, it's still coming from the outside.
Absolutely.
So to go out on a limb and say everything is external, even if it's an internal desire to change. Has to come from the environment, because that animal would not have had that thought if it didn't go in a direction when it was wandering around the planet and see that all the food happened to be too high for them. If they went another way, they wouldn't have had that thought, because all the food would have been low-lying fruit or whatever. So they had to wander into that environment to have that thought in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's really hard to know. I say it's actually hard to know the true story of how much was driven by these desires caused by the environment, and how much of it is just, not intentional, but something happens and then the certain ones are weeded out by natural selection based on survival. It could be a combination of both, and we would never know.
Right, but we can speculate, for example, if mind and matter are different manifestations of the same basic thing, we know from our own experience as human beings in this lifetime that, let's say, we desire to be a certain way. Let's say we want to be more extroverted. We want to be more confident. We want to be whatever, right? We're happier, better people. We can make ourselves that way, right? So so then if mind and matter are different manifestations of this basic stuff, then actually by fulfilling our desires, it may be like all what we define as mental, but it doesn't matter, because mind and matter would be the same thing. So we're actually creating this change with our minds.
Yeah, it just happens to be mind matter over other matter. It's all matter as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I mean, it's true. See, we know that when somebody has a desire to learn to do something, they put effort towards that thing, and that's part of what makes it happen.
Yeah, and like a lot of times, they say that height is hereditary, right? That's partly hereditary, I guess, but it could be the hereditary component of height might be that some people are genetically predisposed to want to be taller. So you have some people desiring to be taller and others, or just with any one of these traits, whether it's height or intelligence or athletic ability or musical ability, this desire may be, at the forefront of all of them.
Yeah, and then there's other things to consider too, like when it comes to skills and talents and stuff. Like, you say you have a whole bunch of musicians in a certain family. How much of it is genetic, and how much of it is the pressure, the fact that the rest of their family is good at something, that they want to be like the rest of their family? So it's hard to say how much is genetic, starting out with, and how much is shaped by growing up in that family.
Right, and Chandler, the way they determine this is there have been a lot of cases where twins have been split at birth, right? Where one twin goes to a family on the East Coast, another twin goes to a family in Europe or something, right? And what happens is then they test these two individuals that have the same genes. These are identical twins, but they have vastly different environments.
Right.
And so they've determined, for example, with intelligence, it's 80% genetic. With some traits like happiness, it's only 50%. So that's how they determine it. Just they have to have identical twins tested in different environments under different influences.
Yeah, those kinds of studies are very interesting. Although you could always call into question the ethics of experimenting on people like that.
Well, yeah, I don't think they're allowed to orchestrate that. It's they have to go back to past histories of twins that through some circumstance were separated. Yeah, no, because that would be extremely unethical. Oh my God.
Yeah.
The betterment of mankind to get to the bottom of this stuff. Why would it be unethical?
Oh, well, come on.
What if they signed off on it?
You want to be the little kids are going to sign off on this?
These are their parents.
No.
The betterment of we got to get the answers to many of these questions to help. They're sacrificing a few kids for the betterment of everybody else.
I don't
It's
think
not that immoral. What if they discover? I was in the men's room, so I don't. What if they discover the cures to cancer because of studies like that?
Actually, it's probably much more moral than eating meat and stuff. So, like, you know, I mean, we do a lot more horrible things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. See, that's
the lives of twins for the betterment of billions of people. It's not that immoral.
Yeah, see, yes, that all comes to the whole interesting topic of, like, is it ethical to, like, you know, push the fat man stop the train to spare more people from being hit by the train? That it turns into one of those dumb philosophical things where it's okay to do something wrong to one person in order to help a bunch of others, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, that's actually how wars are fought. In other words, like, countries sacrifice, like, let's say, you know, 100 people or 1,000 people to save tens of thousands of stuff, or they kill 1,000 people to save 1,000,000 and stuff. Our governments do that routinely.
Or all three of us, you're against torture, right? And so is Chandler.
Yeah.
But what if I told you, if I tortured one person, you know, on television once a week, you know, in a town square for a year at random, like not at random, for someone who did something wrong, like crime would be diminished by 95%. I mean, would you still be against it?
I would.
Hard to say.
Yeah, that's one of those bizarre things. I think we already discussed something similar with Mitch about torture.
Yeah, let's say somebody's got the cure for cancer, right? And, like, he's not going to, like, give it up unless he gets tortured or something. Right. So yeah, it gets really bizarre that, just like, you know, this morality
and on top of that, he doesn't have free will, so torturing him is even more immoral.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get back to the placebo mind matter. So, like, again, like, if we know that, like, for example, drinking caffeine is going to affect our mind, you know, taking a lot of substances, sugar, alcohol, all this stuff affects our mind. We also know that our mind affects our bodies in so many different ways. So, like, what does it mean? That, I mean, how are we supposed to understand that mind and matter are actually the same thing? I mean, what can we do with that understanding?
But obviously there's a limit, because if I took a pill every night that a doctor said would save my life, and if I don't take the pill, I'll die, and one night I thought I took it but didn't, I would still wake up dead. So just thinking I did something does not work if it's in a serious situation where you absolutely need a certain ingredient to survive. So there is definitely a limit. That's obvious. The question is where does the line blur, and where does the limit begin and end? That's what we need to figure out.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, if there was only a way to really get down to the bottom of this, as to just, you know, how much is possible to change things just by believing something.
And actually, there's an interesting part of this, and, like, yeah, people like Trick and people won't believe this, but, like, you know, there's been documented evidence that people like clairvoyance and telepathy, right? But my understanding is, like, decades and decades of research has showed that the effect that they find is becoming smaller and smaller, you know, each decade. So we might have had, let's say, 100,000 years ago, we might have had much more of a power to influence matter with our mind than we have now. You know, it may be a kind of like an ability we were losing.
Yeah, and it's hard to know. On that subject, what I would like to say is, like, well, you know, certain people have certain abilities, like, you know, being extremely good at math, for instance. Like, they're just really good at math, being able to do numbers in their head really quick. And not everybody has it, so it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to actually do experiments on it, as you know, because not everyone has access to it. So it's not like everyone, even if there was telepathy or telekinesis, there's no way to put it in a box to give to everyone and give them that ability.
That's true. That's true. And then again, another connection with this mind-matter thing is, like, if mind and matter are the same thing, can we know the future? Can we look into the future, which is matter, whatever, in the physical universe, and somehow with our mind know something that's happening there?
I don't know.
Anyway, you guys, I haven't spoken to you in a long time, but I know George very well. George, you're a scientist, through and through, with climate change and the no free will. So I have to believe the placebo effect can be definitely studied scientifically, that if you need a drug to live or whatever, and you believe that you've taken it and you believe that well enough and you're still cured, I definitely think there's a blood test or some sort of chemical test or any kind of scientific test that can monitor that effect in you is still took place, whether or not you took the pill or not. If you did it through your mind and your mind alone, it has to be traceable still through science. In other words, there's some test that would come out the same whether or not you took the pill or not if you really studied. I doubt you would take the test and a doctor would say, you're cured, but I don't see how that's possible. Your blood test came out different. You would still have the exact same biochemistry as if you took the pill. So science is still going to trump whatever this mind-body thing that your pseudoscience is saying. The science would still have to be there.
Oh, absolutely.
It would have to be traceable through science.
Whether
or not your mind did it or the pill that you thought you took that you didn't take, it would still have to be traceable somehow.
There's a movie
you agree with that?
There's a movie I just saw. This girl had this condition where her intestines stopped working, right? I forget the name of the film, but then she happens to be in a tree. She falls from the tree. She becomes unconscious, right? And all of a sudden she's able to digest again. And then all of her tests, her blood tests, are all of a sudden normal. So in other words, the science is backing up this change.
Right, but you're not saying the placebo effect happens independently of science.
No, absolutely
not. The actual chemical, physical change, whatever you want to call it, still occurs.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying the mind.
So it's not just
right.
It's not dualism. It's mind body is definitely connected. So whether or not you take the pill but think you took it would still alter your chemistry.
Exactly.
Let's just make that clear.
The belief is changing the neurochemistry. Absolutely.
So the question is, how does that happen?
Yep.
This relates to happen.
It's got to be the classical and operant conditioning. It's the mind anticipating the fact that you took the pill every night and then you didn't, but it's still anticipating the results because it's used to it. It's got to be that.
Chandler, what were you going to say?
Well, this relates to the happiness talk we had before. I think we were talking about this on our Impersonal Opinion podcast about the happiness, because people can derive happiness from having a fun time, doing something they enjoy doing, makes them happy, as would taking a drug that gives them the right chemicals that make them feel happier. But then that you were talking about becoming happier through meditating on the feeling of happiness. And so there's a variety of different ways to achieve the same effect.
That's a perfect example. In other words, if a person was in an MRI machine, right, and they're taking images of the brain, if the person starts making themselves happy because they want to feel happier, that change is going to be manifest in the MRI imaging. So this is
Okay, but say you invented a happiness pill and took the pill every day and became happier. But then I gave you a placebo pill that doesn't do anything. Would you be happier?
That's what, at least with antidepressants, that happens every day.
Because you're anticipating the happiness.
Exactly, because you're told, right, and you're told, all right, it's the same pill. You don't realize it's a sugar pill. So, right, but it's your belief, yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting.
Okay, but the thing is, if that pill was really a serotonin inhibitor, whatever they call it, or uptake, what do they call it? Neuro. And then the next day you took the pill, but it wasn't doing that to your serotonin. How do you account for feeling happier?
That's what I'm saying. It's the placebo effect.
I'm saying it really does still change your serotonin.
Yes, in other words, the pill does change it, but also your belief can change it. So you got two mechanisms changing your serotonin.
You don't think it's the conditioning of Pavlov's dog or operant, classical?
I think it could be that
It has to
too.
be that.
It can be that, yeah.
Well,
That's how
yeah.
it works.
If you're conditioned to think that you're going to be happier because you think the drug is the real drug, and you end up becoming happier anyway, it's having the same effect without the real drug because the belief system makes you feel that way.
Exactly. So yeah, then the question again, like getting back to the question, so like what do you think, what are the theoretical limits to this? How much can we do just with our beliefs, our mind?
How would we find out?
That's a good question. I guess, yeah, no, you're this might take us a few thousand years to figure out. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, but it is interesting to think about.
And again, so like it's not just our mind, it's our DNA may have its own agenda, like that we're actually maybe just like working for the DNA. The DNA is really who we are. We're just kind of like fulfilling the DNA's purpose. And again, these bacteria, these microorganisms that are in our gut that have their own agenda. So like, who we are as human beings could be the result, not so much of our consciousness, but as a result of our DNA and these organisms.
Well, yeah, here's a way of thinking about it. Imagine that you're some kind of let's say you're just some tribe in some, not very populated part of the world. They don't know very much science, they don't have technology, and then they see, like, say, an army tank, okay? And they think of the army tank as if it itself is a person, as if it itself is like a living entity, whereas really there's people inside of the tank operating it. And what I'm saying is that just as the humans are driving the tank, the bacteria and all the other cells in our bodies are driving us. What we are is a vehicle for them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Which then the question becomes, do they have minds, either individually or collectively, that are influencing like our physics, our matter?
The more I think about this, it's interesting because I think if I gave you something really, really harmful for you and you thought it was good, you couldn't escape like the negative effects. But for some reason, if it's positive, you can believe. I don't know why I believe, like, if I gave George something that I know will make him really sick and nauseous, but he didn't know it, I don't think he could talk himself out of it as easily as he could talk himself into feeling better with a pill that really wouldn't make him feel better. I'm trying to figure out why the reverse isn't true. Like if I gave him poison or something and he didn't know it was poison, he would, or cyanide or whatever, he would still get very sick and die.
Well, that's what we're saying. In other words,
I don't know why the reverse isn't true. I'm trying to figure this out.
No, the reverse could be true. In other words, no, I've heard this guy Richard Alpert went to India, right? And he was with this guru, right? And they gave this guy a whole handful of drugs, and nothing happened to the guy.
No, but negative drugs or positive drugs?
Well, they were hallucinogenic or something. I don't know.
No, what I'm saying with positive, if you told him it was a positive drug and it was placebo, I think he would feel positively. But if it's a negative drug that will really, really make you sick, but yet he said it was nothing, I still think you would get sick. I don't think you could talk yourself out of the negative, and this is the first time I'm hearing this. I just came over here. I had no idea this was you guys were, I hadn't thought of this, but the more I think about it, I'm trying to figure out why the negative is not placebo, it's real.
Well, maybe there's both cases of both placebo and other real things in the negative area too.
Exactly. That's a good point. If it's going to affect the positive, it's going to affect the negative as well. Both matter can affect mind and mind can affect matter, whether it's positive or negative. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Like here's an interesting thing. Now, for example, a lot of people, I've heard this, that people they can actually feel stress like when they consume animal flesh, like that it actually affects their emotions negatively, for example. And some people believe that that emotions of that animal is literally going into them. It's hard to know though, because how much of it is influenced by the awareness of the suffering cost of those animals? Because some of us aren't aware, and then after we are aware, we tend to go vegan.
Yeah, I've also heard that sometimes when we eat, let's say, an animal product, and we're angry and we're afraid, that's going to cause problems for our system, like as opposed to eating it when we're calm and feeling good. So yeah, even the quality of our emotions just affect our whole digestion and the processing of foods.
Yeah. And the thing about this is that this placebo effect really kind of screws up scientific results, because however you do a study, if the beliefs are also affecting the results, then you don't have, it's not the same. I'm saying experimenting on living things is not the same as experimenting on non-living things. There would be a huge difference in the results.
Yeah, the placebo effect costs the pharmaceutical industry literally billions and billions of dollars each year, because they have to do so much more testing to weed out what is the placebo and what's the real effect.
Yeah.
All right, but again, like so like, going back to
I still think science will trump. I mean, certain diseases are like 100% physical, and you can trace it to, not having a certain chemical makeup. But like psychological issues like happiness, there's a much bigger, in my opinion, placebo effect.
You know what I think?
So, like, if you're dying of cancer or something, and I don't know if you can meditate your way out of that just by, being happier. But other things that are not as, dire, I think you probably could.
Here's what I think.
I'm trying to find the limit.
Here's what I think. Okay. There's like so many different kinds of conditions and illnesses and stuff, right?
Yeah, right.
And my theory is like, let's say you become angry at people a lot. Well, that's going to make you prone to certain illnesses. Let's say you kind of like mistreat other people. You have bad thoughts about other people in another way. That's going to create an illness. In other words, I have a feeling that like these illnesses that we have are kind of nature's way of punishing us for having like immoral thoughts and actions, toward other people or toward ourselves or toward reality. And then again, depending on what kind of like, and like, for example, there's some really rare diseases that like very few people have, but maybe some people, maybe it runs in families. Maybe in these families, they have these kinds of thoughts and stuff.
So you're saying a very happy, peaceful person should live longer?
Yeah, man, and that's actually demonstrated. The happier you are, the physically healthier you are, the emotionally healthier you are. So there is actually a correlation, yeah.
But you probably have a healthier lifestyle, though.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this also brings up another interesting thing, the idea that some people believe they've been miraculously healed by, the God of whatever the religion happens to be. And what's interesting is all of that could be explained by the placebo effect, by believing that, the deity or the prayers to that deity somehow has a magical effect on curing you of a disease. If that is the placebo effect that actually makes it happen, then of course that would explain why people of any religion would get similar results even if they're praying to different deities, because it's not the deities at all, but the placebo effect and their brain creating the chemicals needed to help their illness.
Exactly, Chandler. It makes perfect sense. It's really not it's not about the God or the saint or whatever. It's about their belief. It's about like they believe it's going to cure them.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is
a limit. There's a limit to that. There's got to be. I mean, you can't just believe your way out of everything. I mean.
Well, or there's this guy in a meetup in Manhattan.
I would say science still trumps everything. I mean, you still have to look at the chemicals.
Nick, there's this guy.
The bacteria, the DNA, whatever it is.
There's this guy who used to come to our meetups in Manhattan, the happiness ones. Jerry, I forget his last name, but he had a tumor in his stomach the size of a grapefruit.
Oh, yeah.
They told him he was going to die. He started working with the beliefs and stuff. 4 months later, the tumor's gone. They can't explain it. I mean, you can, amazing stuff. And that's just one case. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff. They call it like spontaneous remission or just like, spontaneous recovery. There's like, and they don't understand it, but like, fine, we don't understand it. But I think that it's plausible to suspect that it hasn't, that people who believe that they can be healed and that you know, whether it's God or a pill or a doctor or something, that probably has a very strong effect.
Yeah.
But how do you account for the fact that some people can smoke every day for their life and not get lung cancer, and other people can smoke a little? I mean, at the end of the day, it's still your DNA and what your immune system or your resistance, or, you know, what your level of, like for example, like in the animal kingdom, there could be two animals that one has a poisonous thing that kills the other animal, but then at some point on the evolutionary chain, through natural selection, the animal that used to have poison, now that poison tastes like candy to it, and it's like an arms race. It's built up a resistance, and it goes back and forth. So, you know, DNA is always changing, and one person's poison is another person's like medicine. So it's, you know, over time DNA changes, and these negative things don't affect you as much. So it's hard to say where the line, you know, when something's negative, it may not be negative anymore. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So, no, Nick, hold on. You brought up the case of somebody smoking, right? Now, let's say you have two people smoking, right? One person like believes in the science, believes in the doctor, smoking's really bad for you, right? So that may result in that person like getting sick. Whereas how about one person just doesn't believe the science, believes they're all quacks, doesn't believe it at all, and that explains why he doesn't get it.
But one person can smoke every day for his whole life and not get lung cancer purely for the fact that he has DNA that is not susceptible to lung cancer.
No, but the DNA,
so you can believe
going back to what Chandler was saying before, the DNA may not be believing that it can, like, you know, change it. In other words, the DNA may have beliefs of its own.
Yeah.
So you're saying a guy who smokes every day for his whole life won't get lung cancer just because he believes smoking's good for him?
Or that smoking's not bad for him, or that his DNA believes that smoking's not bad for him.
Or he was actually born with DNA that's resistant to that and doesn't have to believe anything. Just like I told you with the animal kingdom. One animal, eventually, it's like an arms race. You invent this gun, I'll invent that. You know, I've counteracted your poison, and now your poison, you know, you zapped me with you stung me, and now I love it. It's delicious. It's no longer poison because I've weeded out that whole part of my family that has died in the past, but now I've built something in my DNA that it doesn't affect me, and now my species is dominating your species for a good 1,000 years with my poison. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but is belief underlying all that, or like belief could be?
It's immunity. It's built up immunity for survival.
Okay. All right, so where else can we go with this? I mean, so again, like getting back to the basic thing, you know, just like mass and energy.
I think all of nature is an arms race. Now that I think
forget about that part. Just like mass and energy are the same, are different manifestations of the same stuff, right? Matter.
Yes.
You know, so like mind and matter are different manifestations of the same stuff. Again, like that I think that's profound. I think that there's a very, very important. It's kind of like we're looking for like the unifying force that's going to unify gravity and electromagnetism and the weak and the strong nuclear force. It's like we might be looking for this unifying reality that underlies both mind and matter.
Yeah, and it's...
Hold on, let Chandler go. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's important to point out that scientific experiments would have a difficult time proving or refuting this. You know, that's the thing, is it's hard to know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, and what I'm wondering if that's a matter of technology, if like we'd have to develop, you know, more sensitive imaging that finds a level of reality, maybe a quantum level that is below the level of mind, that has, you know, characteristics of mind and matter, but it's different somehow. That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're talking about, you know, stuff that's happening on a microscopic scale, what these bacteria, you know, what these blood cells, what they're doing, and how the immune system fights off an illness is a complex matter. And that's what happens is when there's like an illness and the immune system fights it off, that is a war. It's a very small war, but it's a war that's happening. And trying to explain why it happened, however we try to explain it, is going to be very simplistic. Because if someone says, "Oh, I was cured because I prayed," or "I was cured because I took this drug," or the person dies from the illness, and then they try to. But people try to come up with explanations, but all explanations are oversimplified because there's stuff we don't know.
Oh yeah,
yeah, but you guys both don't believe in free will, which is very handy for this discussion because we know for a fact that right now everybody says that, like George said, that there's got to be something underneath the quantum level because we know there has to be a deterministic field underneath the indeterministic field that hasn't been discovered yet. Because we've all theorized that life is deterministic. So we know by deductive reasoning that there's a field underneath the quantum field which is deterministic that no one's discovered yet.
Exactly. Exactly.
The other part is
so indeterminism is not the smallest field. No, they haven't discovered the deterministic field, but we can easily theorize that there's something underneath it, causing everything to be the way it is. And you have to not believe in free will to understand that.
Another component.
So you're right. There's a field underneath.
Another component of this is like sometimes we just like think that we have a mind. We have one mind. There's one mind in your brain, one mind in your brain, one mind in everyone's brain. But the reality is like that within our brain, there's like one part of it that wants one thing, another part of it that wants another thing.
Competing desires.
Yeah, there's like, and who knows how many different quote unquote minds there are in our brain.
You're just talking about competing desires.
Yeah, but competing desires, competing perspectives, competing beliefs, competing, who knows how the whole gamut of different kinds of like characteristics.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you're basically one big computer program trying to figure out which of those desires will ultimately lead you to overall greater life satisfaction. So you can say there's 100 different minds, but it's still one computer operating system of what will give me the greatest amount of pleasure and the least amount of pain. So they're all working together. So what difference does it matter how many there are? They're all interconnected.
No. Chandler, what are your thoughts?
Eventually,
hold on.
Well, I think the main point that George was trying to make is that, we think of people as one mind, as one person who has this belief, this desire. We oversimplify it when there's actually billions of cells that all make a part of their brain, and so there's a lot more going on, and so we cannot simplify it and think of each person as an individual because we're not.
Yeah, and some parts of our mind could care less about pleasure and pain. They're just like interested in our survival as a species. Or some like like Freud kind of like theorized that we have this death instinct, that part of us looking forward to dying because maybe part of us knows that like we'll go to some other realm or something. Mm-hmm. So again, like it's not just pleasure and pain. There could be so many different kinds of motivations that are.
Yeah, but you're saying they're all connected. They're not working independently.
They're all connecting, but I think they could be cooperating to a certain extent, but they could be competing to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's one central part of your mind that is like accumulating and compiling all this different data to make the best possible decision for the most amount of pleasure and the least amount of pain. It's kind of like the referee of this big game, and it's going to weigh the pros and cons of all the different desires and come up with some sort of crude, it's not an exact thing, but some sort of crude, nebulous calculation of what, it's going to run the program and say this is the best decision based on all these competing factors that will always yield me what I believe to be the most amount of pleasure and least amount of pain. So it doesn't, all these little competing factions all have to meet somewhere for some central location to sift through the data to make that kind of determination. So, I don't know why you have to say they're all competing with each other. They're really meeting at some central point.
Well, they could still be competing or cooperating, though.
Right. Some of them could be competing. Expand on that, Chandler.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, just I of course I think of them as little people with their own intentions and desires, and so some of them could be working with others, you know, in cooperation towards a goal, and some could be hostile, as we know in the case where, you know, we have diseases which are cells, but then we also have the immune system that recognizes them as an enemy. So it's hard to know.
Okay, but I'm theorizing that George is saying there might be a little part of you, like he said, that is desiring death because, like George said, because it knows something that we don't know. But that part of you that's desiring death is still theorizing that there's more pleasure in death than living. So it's still the pleasure principle. It just has a different version of it. It's all the same, that its intuition is thinking, oh, we should get out of here because there's more pleasure on the next life. So it's still doing what it perceives to be the most amount of pleasure and least amount of pain, which is killing yourself.
Right.
It's still going in the avenue of, unbeknownst to you, I can sense something in another realm that's better for us. Let's get the hell out of here. So it's still saying what's most towards pleasure and the least amount of pain.
Yeah.
Even though you might think it's self-sabotage and self-destruction, it doesn't believe that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, something we haven't touched on is like, fine, we have this drive to seek pleasure and avoid pain. We have this drive to procreate, to survive and stuff. But then, you know, like, so what mind, where is this mind that put these drives in us to begin with? Because they don't come from us. They come from our DNA, and who knows from where the DNA gets it.
So this drive towards death is really a door that we haven't opened yet, and maybe we have a part of us that really does kind of know on some level that if you just open that door, you'll be a lot happier. Start talking to me. Tell me to talk.
What do you think, Chandler?
I'm not sure what to think anymore. It's all very interesting.
So you told me to talk as loud.
No, this is good. Yeah, no, but look, all right, it's getting on to 8 o'clock, but we are really loud. My neighbor's like, so like, this I think has been an excellent episode, but Nick's got to get going. Chandler, any last thoughts? But we should wrap this up because Nick's got to get going. I think we've done good though. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've covered this. I mean, what I would just say is, you know, this is one of those areas where we're theorizing. We're just kind of guessing as to what's going on to a certain extent. And so it's a nice, interesting philosophical thought. And it can be true. I mean, I believe that there is some evidence that the placebo effect is happening and making people feel better sometimes, and that's a good thing as long as it's working in the positive and rather than the negative, and it may work in the negative too. So overall, this has been a good talk, guys. So all
right, so we all agree that psychological changes can affect brain chemistry. We all agree.
Right, I think we all agree with that. I think that's fairly non-controversial and well established at this point. But then it's always fun just talking with you guys about what does it all mean? What else is there? Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right, Chandler. This is like we're brainstorming, we're hypothesizing, but that's where all science begins.
Absolutely.
And we're all in agreement that the mind and the body are connected, obviously, because a lot of people are dualists and say they're separate.
Yeah,
actually, a lot of Christians believe that.
Right. And
right, so Nick, let Chandler finish the show.
All right.
Go ahead, Chandler.
Yeah, just a response to what Nick just said there is we're saying it's two sides of the same coin is what we're actually saying. That there's mind and there's matter, but they're not separate. They're one. So, right. Yeah, I hope this was enjoyable to our listeners. Thank you for listening and goodbye.